Hello and welcome to GryphonArt. This week I've decided to take a short break from my gift boxes in order to show you how to make these ribbon dispensers, which I recently devised in order to organise my own stock of ribbons, which had got into a complete mess and were driving me a little bit crazy. Now, before we get into the creative side of this, I just want to talk you through some of the thought process behind this design so that you can more readily decide whether you can relate to some of the problems that I was experiencing with my ribbons and whether this form of dispensing is suitable for your own scenario. So the first and perhaps the main problem that I was experiencing was that very easily, particularly where the reels of ribbon were quite full, the ribbon was becoming unravelled. The ends of different reels of ribbon were becoming entangled with each other, and a mess very quickly ensued. So the first thing that I realised I needed to be able to do was to somehow secure the end of this ribbon so that it wasn't going to unravel off the reel. Now, the temptation would have been to just put a bit of double-sided tape on the very end and stick it down onto the rest of the reel of ribbon. But a lot of you were advising against this, saying that the glue would transfer to this section of ribbon on the reel and it resulted in quite a lot of wastage. So that method was not going to be available to me. The other thing that I could have done was stuck a pin through the layers, but again, I didn't want to do that because a pin can actually cause a reasonable amount of damage to the ribbon, which is not easily to get rid of. So that was another thing I needed to avoid. So those were my first two problems that I needed to overcome. Now, on top of that, I also wanted to ensure that I could easily see what colour ribbons I had available to me, and I also wanted to be able to readily swap them about. So if I bought another reel of ribbon, I could reorganise the colour scheme so that I could, as in this case, keep all my blue hues together and all my pinkish reddish hues together, so that again it was easy to see at a glance whether I had the sort of colour that I was looking for. So that was another thing that was important to me. If I just get rid of some of these reels and come back to my original, the other thing that obviously you really want to be able to do with ribbon is to be able to remove any length that you want as and when you need it very quickly. So those are the main criteria for this design. The bonus that came out of this design was that I can easily stack these dispensers in the same way that you would books or cassettes, that sort of thing. And because the ribbon reel is fully enclosed, your ribbon stays really nice and clean. It's not exposed to the dust in the same way. So those are the thought processes behind this particular design, and if I've still managed to maintain your interest, we can get down to the creative side of it. Now, the first thing that we need to do is to make up two of these pockets which contain our ribbon reel and stop it from rolling around all over the place. I'll just show you that. So that's the first thing that we need to work with. Now, the dispenser that we're going to be making today is specific to this size reel, which is 7¼ inches in diameter and contains 100 yards of 6mm wide gross grain ribbon. However, I don't want you to worry if your own ribbon reels are of a different size, because I am going to endeavour to indicate to you what to watch out for in order to ensure that your dispenser works. but also include the relationship between the size of this reel and the measurements that we're going to be using today, so that perhaps also in addition to using the free downloadable template that I'll be providing, you'll be able to take that information, adjust the measurements, and end up with a dispenser size that is specific to your own ribbon stock that you have. So each of those pockets that I showed you a few minutes ago takes one piece of A4 card, and you want to trim that back along the longest length by taking off about 1/4 inch, and that will leave you with a piece of card that is 8 inches by 11 5/8 inch, and we're going to place that on our scoreboard or self-heal mat if you're using that for scoring in portrait fashion. So for the first of those dimensions that I promised I'd give you, if we take a look at our reel, we can see that it's approximately 3/8 inch wide. Now, it's possibly slightly less than that, but what you don't want to do is make your pocket so tight that it's grabbing your ribbon, and when you come to dispense, your reel is not going to roll. So it's that sort of compromise. If you've got a little bit of space, it's still going to contain your ribbon, but also the reel will roll. So that's your first thought process when you're looking to create your own dimensions. So we've established 3/8 inch. That's what we want for the edges of our pockets, and what that corresponds to is it means that we're going to score at 3/8 inch here along the full length of our card. Sorry you can't see all of that on camera. And then we also need to score at 7 5/8 inch. Now between those two score lines, that actually leaves us with 7 1/4 inches, which is the diameter of our ribbon reel. So that should help you see the relationships, I'm hoping, for your own reel sizes. So we can now turn our card anti-clockwise, so into landscape mode, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to score those lines for you, and then I'll explain them afterwards. So we're going to score at 2 1/8 inch, five 5/8 inch, 6 inches, and 9 1/2 inches. So in order just to illustrate those measurements a little for you, if I just return you to this completed set of pockets, we know that the width or the diameter of our ribbon reel is 7 1/4 inches, but we need to have a 1/4 inch gap. That's what I've allowed in this case to dispense the ribbon. So you need a gap for that dispensing mechanism. So what I've done is I've reduced that diameter by 1/4 inch to leave me with a 1/4 inch gap here, and that's left me with 7 inches. If I divvy that up into 2, that leaves me with 3 1/2 inches for each depth of our pocket. So that's where these measurements have been derived from. Now, if you remember, we also ascertained that we needed 3/8 inch for the width of our reel, and we scored 3/8 inch down the sides of our pocket. Now that needs to be duplicated along the bottom of the pocket as well, which accounts for that central set of score lines. So we've covered from here to here. Now that does leave us with these two end sections. And you may consider that they're completely unnecessary, and if you choose to leave them off, that's not a problem at all. The reason why I've left them is that they do provide some extra strength to the edges of these pockets, because they're just folded in there. I don't know whether you can see. And that gives an extra strength here. Now, whether or not you include those flaps is going to potentially be dependent on the thickness of the card that you use for these pockets. But as always, I tend to err on the side of caution, and I am in favour myself of those flaps. That's entirely up to you. If you're using a very thick card, obviously that is going to decrease that gap that you've got. So it's just something to consider when you sort out your own dimensions. Now that's actually all our score lines for our single pocket. You've probably already realized that we need 2 of these. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to score another piece of card exactly the same as I've done already. I'll fold along all the score lines, and then I'll come back to you at that stage. So I've now got 2 pieces of card exactly the same, so 1 for each pocket, and I've folded along all those score lines as I said that I would. So I'm now just going to get rid of one of those, because we'll just make up 1 pocket at a time. Now, just as a quick hint for any of those of you who might be new to scoring and folding card, when you come to the folding stage, just I would advise not to use the sides of your card as a point for lining up. It's better that you make sure that you use the fold line and line it up with the corresponding line on the other side of the card. As long as you make sure that these are always in line, you should end up with a fairly square finished item. So that's just a little extra something for the beginner. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to assume that you've incorporated these additional end flaps. So the first thing that we need to do is to cut away this section of unneeded card. And bearing in mind that these flaps are going to be stuck down, you want to get rid of this fold as well. So do cut to one side of that slightly. I'll just demonstrate that for you very quickly. We did the same the other side. So you're actually cutting away the evidence of that fold line as well. It just means that the flap will sit more happily in the space and won't stop the edges from being able to be folded in, these edges. It won't inhibit them. So I'll quickly do the other end and then I'll come back to you after that. So the next thing that we need to do, and I've actually already done it on this side, is to cut into the card here to create little flaps that we always need with box style things, and that will enable us to construct our pocket. So we're now at the construction stage, and the first thing that we need to do is to stick down these reinforcing end flaps. So if you've been watching any of my videos at all, you'll know that I like to use a combination of PVA and double-sided tape. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my double-sided tape on first. So this is going on the inside of the flap, so you know, not the presentation side. That's the right side of your card. You can see which way that's folding in, I hope. So, and I'm only going to do one end of this on camera because there's no point in taking up too much of your time. It's precious to everyone, so I certainly don't like to waste it. And if you don't know the reasons behind me using this adhesion combination, it's basically because particularly on large areas of card like this, if I was to use all glue, PVA glue, the moisture out of the glue would potentially cause that card to distort. Something I always worry about, so I find it easier just to use a combination. And the double-sided tape seems to act like a brace, so it keeps the shape of the card relatively intact, and I like that. But you know what, we all find our little funny ways of doing things. There's no right or wrong, so if you've got another method of gluing that you prefer, I'm with you. I understand that completely, so do use whatever you're comfortable with. You don't have to mimic what I'm doing at all. So I'm just going to get rid of that backing on that double-sided tape now. Doesn't take too much work. Sometimes it's fiddlier than at others, actually. So that's out of the way. And then I tend to just work from this edge where I know I've got tape. Stick that down. And then just use my bone folder. Or hands, fingers, whatever works for you. And immediately that's strengthened up that card quite significantly. So I'm going to do that to the other end, this flap here, so that we end up with that scenario, and then I'll come back to you at that point. Right, so that's all ready, and we're now ready to assemble our box. So I start with these little end flaps. So on the right side, I've placed a little bit of glue on each of them. Oh, bit too much. Never mind. Can use that. So on there, on this little flap as well. And then that might, because it's PVA, it doesn't go off straight away, so I could leave that just for a second to go off as I clean my fingers. So I'm then going to just bend this section up. You know, if you prefer, you'll find a way that you're most comfortable with working, but I tend to bring a back section up towards this flap, which is in an upward position. It's going to go on the inside, but the reel of your ribbon is curved, so it won't touch it. It's not going to be problematic. And then by keeping this back section flat, I can then bring this side section in and also keep that in contact with my, in this case, self-heal mat, so that I can form a nice right angle adhesion with that little flap. As I say, the PVA unfortunately takes a little while to go off, so please bear with me. I'm going to set that up for the other end as well, so keeping everything flat to the board, get a nice right angle join on that. And I will show you that in a second when the glue has gone off enough. If I pick it up now, it'll probably pop out of place. I think that's probably dry enough. So I don't know whether you can see that. It's probably self-explanatory to most of you. So that's what you're doing for phase one. Once that's sorted, we can then put some glue onto these little end flaps and glue those down as well. And in fact, in this case, I don't know whether you've noticed that that flap's slightly smaller, and I am going to put that on top because it's less likely to go over the edge. So I could have used double-sided tape, of course, as well. And actually, there is an argument maybe if you've got high adhesive, so extra tacky double-sided tape, which I know is out there, you might decide that it's sufficient to hold this. But just bear in mind that your ribbon is going to be or your ribbon reel is going to be pushing against this, so you do want to have quite a strong join there. Now once you've got it into a place where it's at least taken a bit of a hold, you can use a bone folder or something similar just to apply some pressure from the inside, and hopefully that will help to ensure that it stays in place. So there we are. So I'm now going to do this side just the same, and then I'm going to come back to you at that point. Right, so that's our pocket now finished and ready to go. And whilst the camera was off, I made the other one so that it would save a little bit of your time. So we can go ahead now and put our reel into the pocket. And it's just a question of positioning this tail where you want it to be. So, and these are interchangeable. Once this ribbon is finished with, as long as I get another reel of a similar size, it will go in this dispenser. So they are fully reusable in that respect. Although they are dependent on the reel size, obviously, but that's about it. So once you've got the length of tail that you want on there, and just pop the other pocket on the top, and you've got the first phase of your dispenser complete. Now I will say that originally I only planned to take this dispenser as far as this, and I thought that would work fine, but what I was finding is that this tended to rock. There was a lack of stability across this central section, and I didn't really like it. So that was why I went one step further and created a sleeve that would brace this in place where I wanted it and keep it a little bit neater perhaps. But that's entirely up to you, but we will cover the sleeve for you next. Right, so we're now back to our scoring board. But before we start scoring, I just want to show you this sleeve, which is what we're going to be making next. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to see that this is actually made out of two pieces of card which I've joined together, simply because I haven't got a piece of card long enough to do it in one hit. Now I do like to start out with standard card sizes, so you're going to want 2 pieces of A4 card to start with, and you're going to be reducing the side, the width of that A4 card by 1 inch, so that you end up with a piece of card that's 7 1/4 inches wide by 11 5/8 of an inch long. Now I just want to remind you that 7 1/4 inch width directly relates to the width of our ribbon reel. So that if you're adapting these measurements, you want your sleeve width to be equating to the diameter of the reel in question. So you're going to need 2 pieces of card cut back in the same way to a 7 1/4 inch width, but for one piece only, you're going to further cut it back so that you end up with a piece of card that's actually 7 1/4 inches square. So that will give you the 2 pieces that you require for the sleeve in this particular instance. So we're going to take that longer piece of card and put it face down, so we'll be scoring on the wrong side of the card, and we'll position it in a landscape position. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to score the lines as before, and then I'll come back to you to explain the relationship to the reel of ribbon. So we want 1 3/4 inches to start with. Then we're going to 2 1/8. You may already start to see that that's a 3/8 of an inch division, which we've already come across before. Then we're going to go to 9 1/2 inches. And then 9 7/8 of an inch, which again gives us that 3/8 of an inch division. Now that's all the scoring that's required. So in the interest of time, I will get rid of my scoring board now, fold along those lines, then I'll come and explain those dimensions to you. So that's all those folds put in place, and I've also put double-sided tape on there ready for the first phase of construction. So, but we'll ignore that for the moment. What I want to show you is the relationship to those dimensions. So it's probably easier if I put that reel of ribbon that's already in the pockets inside here. Now, we know that the diameter of our ribbon reel is 7¼ inches, and I've retained that more or less on both of these dimensions. So we've got a 7¼ inch square section here. Because of where the folds are placed, it might be slightly more than that, which is actually beneficial, but the way that we scored it, essentially we could have ended up with an exact square here, and that was certainly what I was aiming for. Now, the 3/8 of an inch width was the width that we also used for our pocket, so it matches it. It's exactly the same as this width here, so it's going to be essentially a tight fit. And for that reason, what I'm going to do is, when I come to fit this back section, I'm not going to fit it tightly. So although this is 7¼ inches square, I will keep a little bit of extra card at either end so that it's the sleeve is actually a looser fit on these pockets. Now, the reason why I want to explain this is because, and that might help you when you're coming to make up pockets and sleeves for your own size reels, is that the more pressure that I place on either ends of these pockets, the more grabbing action there is going to be on that reel of ribbon. And the impact of that is that it will either diminish or completely inhibit the reel's ability to rotate within those pockets, and you'll lose your dispensing action. So you do want, whilst you want these pockets to fit and you want them to hold on to that reel, you don't want it to grab that reel so tightly that it can't move. So if you're creating your own dispenser sizes, you just need to be aware of that. Right, so we may as well move on, and this first fit we don't need to do in situ, so I'll move that out of the way for the time being. So I've already put my double-sided tape on here, as is characteristic with the way that I work, and I tend to also do dry runs, as those of you who are familiar with my videos will also know. So I like to just check to see how squarely this sits, because you do want your sleeve to be nicely in line on the pockets. So I can see that sits quite nicely. So I'll put the glue on here and then I can glue that together. I will do that quickly on camera for you, because you never know, might be of interest. Not much to see, but there we go. So I don't put it on this bit because it might end up being visible, so just on these two sections here. Just means that the edges get stuck down, which I think is preferable. Right, so get rid of that backing tape. Oops, there we go, last one. There we are. So we can actually flatten that so that we can clearly see our fold line, and just place our section of card along the edge there. That double-sided tape will grab straight away, so you do need to have an idea that it is positioning correctly. and I can see that that's absolutely fine. So I'll apply the necessary pressure to make sure that's in place. I am just going to check that there's no glue, because ordinarily I'd give this a little chance to go off, but I want to move on quickly for you. So in fact, what I'm going to do now is put the double-sided tape on the other side in the same way, and then I can come back to you at the point that we're ready to fix it. That'll save you some time. Okay, so I've set everything up nicely, ready to go. All my double-sided tape is on, my backing tape's off. I've put my glue down, so it's now just a question of lining up this top section with this bottom section, and as I say, not making it too tight. So there will this section, which is actually 7¼ inches square, will not go right to the very edge, as you'll see when I've finished. So I'm just going to line that up. And then apply some pressure with my bone folder. So if I can just show you, that is fairly in line with that particular end, on that, more or less on that fold. But you can see at this end, I hope, that actually there's probably a good 3 millimeters of space on that back. So it does mean that the sleeve is probably not particularly square, but the compromise is that it's not grabbing that ribbon reel, and it does mean that the ribbon dispenses nicely. So there you are, that's the ribbon dispenser for that particular size reel. If I come up with some smaller dimensions, I will let you have them in the fullness of time. In the meantime, I hope that's given you enough information to enable you to customize that template that is downloadable from my website at GryphonArt.co.uk, so that you can take that tutorial further. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope that you found this tutorial of some interest and use, and that you'll come back to me at a later date to watch some of my other tutorials. Thank you very much. Bye bye.